Deep in the sands of ancient Egypt, buried beneath layers of time and myth, lie secrets so startling they were almost erased from history. Among the crumbling papyrus scrolls and temple inscriptions, there's a recurring warning, one that whispers of a forbidden act, a line humanity was never meant to cross. The texts speak of cloning not as a modern scientific marvel, but as a terrifying violation of the natural order, especially when it came to the pharaohs. Why would a civilization so advanced in medicine and magic fear the replication of their god-kings? What did they know that we're only beginning to uncover? Imagine standing in the shadow of the pyramids, holding a scroll that hasn't been read in millennia. As your fingers trace the hieroglyphs, you realize this isn't just a historical record, it's a dire prophecy. The ancient Egyptians believed their pharaohs were more than rulers. They were divine bridges between the mortal world and the realm of the gods. To clone such a being wasn't just dangerous, it was sacrilege, an act that could unravel the very fabric of existence. These warnings weren't mere superstition. They were rooted in a profound understanding of balance, a fear that tampering with the essence of a pharaoh could unleash chaos beyond comprehension. Today, as scientists push the boundaries of genetic engineering, these ancient admonitions take on a chilling new relevance. Were the Egyptians privy to a truth we've yet to fully grasp? Could their legends of twisted doubles and cursed clones hold clues to dangers we're only now confronting? This isn't just a story about the past, it's a mirror reflecting our own ethical dilemmas, a testament to humanity's eternal struggle with playing God. As we unravel the mysteries of these texts, we're not just decoding history, we're stepping into a conversation that spans thousands of years, one that challenges everything we think we know about power, divinity, and the limits of human ambition. The journey begins now. To understand why the idea of cloning a pharaoh would send chills down the spines of the ancient Egyptians, we need to step into their worldview, one where life, death, and identity were woven together in ways that might seem alien to us today. For them, a person wasn't just flesh and bone, they were a complex tapestry of spiritual elements, each with its own role in existence. At the heart of this belief were the Ka and the Ba, the twin forces that defined a person's essence. The Ka was the life force, the spark that animated the body, while the Ba represented the individual's unique personality, the part that journeyed through the afterlife. Together, they formed an inseparable bond with the physical form, a bond so sacred that disturbing it risked unraveling the soul itself. Now, imagine the horror of duplicating a pharaoh, a being believed to carry the divine mandate of the gods. Cloning wouldn't just create a copy of the body, it would fracture the very essence of their being. The Egyptians saw resurrection as a carefully orchestrated rebirth, a return of the Ba to its rightful vessel, guided by rituals and spells from the Book of the Dead. But a cloned body, that was an empty shell, a vessel without a soul's true imprint. The thought of a pharaoh's Ka and Ba split between two forms would have been tantamount to spiritual blasphemy, a violation so severe it could disrupt Maat, the cosmic order that kept chaos at bay. This wasn't just philosophical speculation. The fear was etched into their myths. Take the tale of Osiris, the god-king murdered and dismembered by his brother Set. When Isis reassembled his body, it wasn't a perfect resurrection. Osiris became lord of the underworld, not the living. Even the gods couldn't fully restore what was lost. For mortals, the stakes were even higher. A cloned pharaoh might resemble the original, but without the sacred rites, the proper passage through Juat, the underworld, the duplicate would be an abomination, a soulless mockery of divinity. Modern science might dismiss these beliefs as superstition, but the underlying warning is eerily prescient. The Egyptians understood something we're still grappling with today. Identity isn't just encoded in DNA. It's a fragile alchemy of body, mind, and something far less tangible. tamper with that balance, and the consequences could be far more terrifying than we ever imagined. The Pharaoh wasn't just a ruler, he was a living god, the earthly embodiment of Horus, the falcon-headed deity who wielded the power of the sun itself. To the ancient Egyptians, this wasn't symbolism, it was a tangible reality woven into the fabric of their world. The Pharaoh stood at the threshold between heaven and earth, his every action a ripple in the delicate balance of Maat, the cosmic principle of truth, justice, and order. When he spoke, it was with the authority of the divine. When he ruled, it was with the wisdom of the gods. And when he died, his journey through the underworld wasn't just a personal trial, it was a cosmic event, ensuring the sun would rise again and the Nile would flood as it should. To clone such a being would be to fracture this sacred symmetry. Imagine a world with two suns. Chaos would follow. The Egyptians believed the same applied to the Pharaoh. His body wasn't merely a vessel, it was a consecrated relic, a focal point for the divine energy that sustained creation. Duplicating that form would create an unnatural echo, a dissonance in the harmony of the universe. The myths warned of this. In the story of Horus and Set, the struggle for the throne wasn't just political, it was a battle for cosmic legitimacy. Only one could truly carry the divine mandate. A cloned pharaoh would force that conflict into reality, pitting two claimants against each other with the stability of the world at stake. And it wasn't just about power. The pharaoh's role was deeply tied to ritual. Every coronation, every offering, every utterance of his name reinforced the bond between the mortal and divine realms. A clone would lack that history, that sacred continuity. Without the proper rites, without the decades of preparation, the anointing by the priests of Ammon, the trials of the Jewat, the duplicate would be a hollow imitation, a usurper of cosmic proportions. The Pyramid Texts, some of the oldest religious writings in existence, are explicit. The pharaoh's body must remain singular, untouched by such profane tampering, lest the gates of chaos swing wide open. Today, we might dismiss these fears as relics of an unscientific age, but consider this, even now we grapple with the ethics of cloning, the unease that comes with replicating life. The Egyptians may have framed it in myth, but their warning resonates with a startling clarity. Some lines, they believed, were never meant to be crossed, not out of ignorance, but out of reverence for forces we still don't fully understand. The Pyramid Texts carved into the walls of the oldest pyramids aren't just spells for the afterlife, they're a cryptic rulebook for preserving cosmic order. Among the thousands of incantations meant to guide the pharaoh's soul, there are startling passages that seem to address something far more unsettling: the danger of copying the sacred form of a god-king. One spell, known as Utterance 387, warns of a shadow without light, a body without its name, a chilling metaphor that scholars interpret as a direct reference to cloning. That name, in Egyptian belief, wasn't just a label, it was the essence of a person's identity, a magical key to their existence in the afterlife. To recreate a pharaoh's body without capturing this essence, that was to create a monstrosity, a vessel doomed to wander without purpose. Another passage describes the fate of such a duplicate. His car will hunger, his bar will stray, and the gods will turn their faces from him. This wasn't just poetic imagery. The car, as the life force, required sustenance normally provided through offerings left at the tomb. But a cloned pharaoh would have no rightful tomb, no cult of priests to sustain him. His bar, the personality that navigated the afterlife, would be lost, severed from the original's divine journey. The texts even describe cosmic repercussions, with the Nile refusing to flood and the stars going silent, if such an abomination were allowed to exist. What makes these warnings so fascinating is their specificity. They don't just forbid cloning, they detail the mechanics of why it would fail. One spell explicitly states that the breath of life cannot enter a vessel made by human hands unless the gods themselves anoint it. This mirrors modern debates about the soul or consciousness in cloning. Can a copy truly be alive in the same way as the original? The Egyptians answered with a resounding no, framing it as a violation of divine law. Even the process of mummification, which preserved the body for resurrection, was seen as a sacred act guided by Thoth's wisdom. A clone created outside this ritual framework would be an affront to the gods. The most haunting evidence comes from the tomb of Unas, where a damaged but legible passage speaks of the second king, who walks with empty eyes. Some researchers argue this describes a failed duplicate, a being with the pharaoh's face but none of his divine radiance. It's a concept that echoes through later myths, like the doppelgangers in the Tale of Two Brothers or the corrupted replicas in the Book of Gates. These weren't just stories, they were cautionary tales, reinforcing a cultural terror of tampering with the blueprint of divinity. Today, as we stand on the brink of cloning breakthroughs, these ancient warnings take on new weight. The Pyramid texts weren't superstition, they were the culmination of millennia observing the delicate interplay between body, soul, and the universe. Whether you view them as spiritual insight or psychological archetypes, one thing is clear: the Egyptians understood that some boundaries once crossed can't be uncrossed. And their hieroglyphs, etched in stone, remain a stark reminder that not all knowledge is meant to be used. The coffin texts, inscribed on burial containers during Egypt's Middle Kingdom, take the warnings against copying royal forms even further, spelling out consequences so dire they border on apocalyptic. Unlike the Pyramid texts, which spoke in veiled metaphors, these spells are startlingly direct. One passage from spell 394 commands, "Do not fashion his likeness in flesh, lest the sky grow heavy with silence." Another warns that any attempt to replicate the pharaoh's form would trap not just the copied soul but all souls in a state of unrest, denying them passage through the duat. The message is clear: cloning a god-king wasn't just taboo, it risked collapsing the entire architecture of the afterlife. What makes these rituals particularly chilling is the specificity of their curses. A spell from the coffin of Governor Jehutinakhet describes a ritual gone wrong where a sorcerer tried to recreate a noble's form using wax and hair. The result: a being with the face of a man but the hunger of Ammit, the devourer of the dead. The text claims this abomination lingered near the tomb, draining offerings meant for the true deceased, until priests performed an exorcism involving fire and sacred ibis blood. While this wasn't a pharaoh, the implication was clear. If replicating a noble's body could unleash chaos, duplicating a divine ruler's form would invite catastrophe. The rituals to prevent such copying reveal just how real the fear was. Some coffins include binding spells etched in reverse hieroglyphs, a technique reserved for neutralizing threats. One such spell, discovered in a Siat, addresses Anubis directly. "Let no hand craft his image in earth or resin, lest the scales of Maat tremble." The use of materials like resin is telling. It was used in funerary masks, suggesting the Egyptians feared even artistic representations could become vessels for corrupted souls. Another ritual involved painting the deceased's name in green ink, the color of renewal, while systematically burning any unused sketches or molds. This wasn't mere superstition. It was a meticulous safeguarding of identity in a world where the line between art and reality blurred in the realm of magic. Perhaps the most haunting account comes from a fragmented text in the tomb of Senusret III. It describes a failed attempt to call forth the Ka of the drowned king, using a statue molded from Nile clay. The result was a being that walked as a man but spoke in the voices of the forgotten dead, a clear reference to cloning gone awry. The priests allegedly had to dismantle it limb by limb, reciting spells to banish each piece to a different nome of Egypt. This wasn't just about physical danger, it was about safeguarding the metaphysical order. The pharaoh's uniqueness wasn't a political privilege, it was a cosmic necessity. Modern parallels abound. Today's debates over cloning ethics often hinge on questions of individuality and consent. The Egyptians framed it differently. For them, cloning a pharaoh wasn't just unethical, it was impossible because true divinity couldn't be replicated. A copy would lack the heka, the divine magic that animated the original. In their eyes, such an act wouldn't just produce a flawed duplicate, it would create a rogue entity, a void where the rules of existence no longer applied. The coffin texts don't just forbid cloning, they outline a theology of identity so precise it still resonates in our own unease about playing God. The Book of the Dead, often misunderstood as a mere guide to the afterlife, holds cryptic verses that function like ancient warning labels specifically against the unholy replication of a pharaoh's form. Among its spells, one stands out like a throbbing nerve, chapter 32, known as the spell for not dying a second death. It doesn't just promise eternal life, it explicitly condemns any attempt to split the likeness of the deceased. The text describes a horror beyond physical death, a spiritual disintegration where the cloned pharaoh's soul would fracture, unable to recognize its own reflection in the afterlife's mirror. Without a singular, undivided identity, the duplicate would become a ghost in the machine of the Duat, barred from judgment before Osiris and trapped in a sunless corridor between worlds. This wasn't abstract theology. The Book of the Dead's illustrations reinforce the terror. In the vignette for chapter 125, where the heart is weighed against the feather of Maat, a grotesque detail appears in some versions, a second, shadowy scale hovering just off to the side, its dish filled with a twisted, identical heart. Scholars argue this represents the unsanctioned double, a cloned pharaoh's essence condemned to eternal imbalance, forever weighed but never judged. The original could ascend to Aru, the paradise of the reeds, while the copy would be left screaming into the void, a soul without a destination. The texts even prescribe counter-rituals. Spell 176, inscribed on a papyrus now housed in Turin's museum, instructs priests to burn effigies of the usurping shadow while reciting, "You have no name, no breath, no place at the table of the gods." The specificity is chilling. The Egyptians didn't just fear cloning, they anticipated it, crafting metaphysical firewalls to neutralize its consequences. One passage warns that a pharaoh's clone would become a magnet for chaotic forces, drawing in demons like the Eater of Faces to consume its stolen identity. Perhaps the most haunting evidence comes from an anomaly in the tomb of Ramesses VI. A passage from the Book of Caverns, a later funerary text, depicts a chamber where those who wear the king's face but not his crown are tormented by serpentine guardians. These entities, called the Tefiu, aren't enemies of the pharaoh, they're enforcers of cosmic copyright, ensuring no duplicate dilutes the sanctity of the original. The message is undeniable. In a universe governed by divine order, some blueprints were never meant to be photocopied. Modern minds might dismiss this as primitive fear, but the psychological insight is staggering. The Egyptians grasped a truth we're still unpacking. Identity isn't just biological. Their second death mirrors today's debates about cloned beings lacking lived experience, memories, or legal personhood. The Book of the Dead didn't just warn of spiritual consequences, it foresaw the existential dread of being a copy in a world that values originals. As we decode these texts, we're not just reading ancient spells, we're holding up a mirror to our own unease about playing God in an age of artificial replication. Deep within the pillared halls of Karnak, where torchlight flickers against millennia-old reliefs, a series of carvings tell a story modern eyes might mistake for fantasy until you grasp their terrifying context. Along the temple's inner sanctum, a procession of figures kneels not in worship, but in agony, their limbs twisted as jagged bolts of divine energy strike them down. The accompanying hieroglyphs identify these as the makers of false faces, a euphemism so poetic it almost softens the horror of what's being depicted. These aren't just artistic warnings, they're explicit records of divine retribution against those who dared replicate the sacred. One particularly vivid tableau shows a group of priests, their titles still legible, cowering before an enraged Thoth. The ibis-headed god holds not his usual scroll, but a flaming ankh, its heat blistering the skin of a man caught mid-gesture, his hand still shaping a clay effigy of the pharaoh. The inscription above him reads, "He who molds the divine form shall be unmade by it." This wasn't metaphor. Archaeologists found remnants of actual sculpting tools buried ritually near this wall, suggesting someone attempted and failed to recreate royal likenesses with consequences severe enough to warrant a permanent temple record. Luxor's walls add another layer to this dread. In the hidden corridor behind the birth shrine, a lesser-known relief depicts a scene that chills the blood. Anubis, usually a guide to the afterlife, stands with his jackal jaws clamped around the neck of a figure labeled the Mirror Walker. Between them hovers a spectral double of the pharaoh, its features blurred as if melting. The text explains this entity is a Ka thief, a being who steals the life force of the true king through imitation. The punishment, eternal dismemberment, with each piece of the clone's soul fed to a different demon of the Duat. What makes these temple records so significant is their specificity. Unlike the abstract warnings in funerary texts, these carvings document actual events, or at least the Egyptians' belief in their occurrence. The Karnak inscriptions even include dates, placing one purge of the copyists during the reign of Amenhotep III. Historians note this coincided with a mysterious gap in royal artisan records, as if an entire workshop vanished overnight. But the most unsettling detail lies in Luxor's solar courtyard. Here, a rare depiction shows not just human offenders, but a god suffering for the sin of replication. A battered relief, deliberately defaced in antiquity, hints at Set attempting to clone Osiris during their mythic feud. The surviving fragments show his stolen form cracking apart, his stolen Ka screaming as it's torn between two bodies. This wasn't just a lesson for mortals, it was a cosmic law even deities couldn't escape. Today, as laser scans reveal deeper layers beneath these carvings, we're left with an unnerving realization. The Egyptians didn't just fear cloning, they documented its consequences with the precision of a forensic report. Whether these events were literal or symbolic, their message transcends time. Some lines, once crossed, provoke wrath beyond mortal comprehension. And the gods, it seems, keep receipts. The myth of Osiris, often celebrated as a triumph of resurrection, holds a darker subtext when viewed through the lens of forbidden recreation. At first glance, it's a story of love and perseverance, Isis gathering her husband's scattered limbs, Thoth restoring his breath, and Osiris rising to rule the underworld. But peel back the layers and a chilling parallel emerges. This isn't just rebirth. It's a grotesque reconstruction, a patchwork resurrection that leaves the god-king fundamentally altered. His reassembled body doesn't return to the land of the living. He becomes lord of the dead, forever severed from the sunlit world he once ruled. The message is as subtle as a tomb seal cracking under pressure. Some forms of recreation carry irreversible consequences. Consider the method of Osiris's revival. Isis doesn't create a new body, she retrieves and reanimates the original, down to the last fragment. Even then, it's not a perfect restoration. The legendary phallus, lost to the Nile's currents, must be fashioned from gold, introducing an unnatural element into his divine form. This detail is often glossed over, but to the ancient Egyptians it was a glaring flaw. Gold symbolized eternity, yes, but also artifice, a substance that mimicked life without possessing its essence. Osiris's resurrection then becomes a cautionary experiment. Even with magic, even with the god's intervention, the reconstructed whole is lesser than the original. The myth takes on eerie significance when contrasted with Set's original crime. He doesn't just murder Osiris, he dismembers him, scattering the pieces to prevent reassembly. This wasn't mere brutality, it was a deliberate act of metaphysical sabotage. In Egyptian belief, the body's integrity was essential for the afterlife. By fragmenting Osiris, Set wasn't just destroying a rival, he was attempting to fracture his very identity, ensuring no single vessel could contain his Ka and Ba fully. When Isis succeeds in reassembling him, it's not a full victory. Osiris is whole enough to function, but his dominion shifts irrevocably to the underworld, a kingdom of shadows, not the vibrant earthly realm he once governed. Modern readers might miss the subtext. This isn't just a story about death and rebirth. It's a parable about the limits of reconstruction. The Egyptians understood that some acts of recreation, whether through magic, ritual, or by extension the forbidden art of cloning, couldn't restore wholeness. They could only produce a facsimile, a being forever marked by the seams of its making. Osiris's golden phallus becomes a potent symbol, a replacement part in an otherwise divine machine, a flaw that echoes through eternity. The myth's conclusion drives the point home. Osiris's son Horus must still battle Set to reclaim the throne, proving that even a resurrected god's legacy requires a true heir, not a recreation. The underworld may accept a reassembled ruler, but the land of the living demands something purer, an unbroken lineage, a soul untarnished by reconstruction. In this light, Osiris's story isn't just a triumph of love over death. It's a divine warning. Some lines once crossed change everything, and no amount of gold or magic can undo that. By the twilight of Egypt's dynasties, as the age of pyramids faded into the era of alchemy, the taboo against cloning took on a new form, one distilled in glass vessels and encoded in cryptic formulas. The famed Hermetic texts, those alchemical scrolls whispered to contain the secrets of immortality, carried an unexpected caveat. The elixir of life was never to be used on a pharaoh. At first glance, this seems contradictory. Why would a civilization obsessed with eternal life deny its god-kings the ultimate prize? The answer lies in the fine print of those recipes, where immortality wasn't about preserving the original, but avoiding the creation of something other. Take the Leiden Papyrus, a 3rd century alchemical treatise brimming with formulas for artificial life. One recipe, titled The Awakening of the Golden Form, instructs the adept to blend mandrake root, powdered lapis lazuli, and the tears of a reborn god into a tincture capable of reviving the dead. But a warning follows in stark hieratic script: let no king drink of this cup, lest his shadow rise up to claim his throne. This wasn't superstition, it was chemistry with cosmic stakes. The Egyptians understood that true resurrection required more than biological revival. It demanded the soul's uninterrupted journey through the duat. An elixir might reanimate the body, but without the proper rites, it would create a hollow facsimile, a being with the pharaoh's face but none of his divine mandate. The parallels to cloning are uncanny. In the demotic magical papyrus of London and Leiden, a spell to fashion a homunculus describes molding a clay figure infused with the target's hair and blood, a primitive form of genetic replication. The text warns that if used on royalty, the resulting creature would become a Ka-devourer, draining the original's life force. This mirrors modern cloning dilemmas. Can a copied being truly inherit the essence of the original, or does it become a parasitic echo? The alchemist's answer was unequivocal. Their elixirs were meant for common souls precisely because a pharaoh's divinity couldn't be bottled or replicated without catastrophic imbalance. Even the legendary Emerald Tablet, attributed to Thoth himself, conceals a warning beneath its famed axiom, as above, so below. Later commentaries by Alexandrian alchemists reveal a forbidden addendum, except the crowned one whose likeness is not of earth. In other words, the cosmic symmetry that governed alchemy shattered when applied to pharaohs. Their bodies weren't just vessels, they were singular points where the divine and mortal planes intersected. To artificially extend a pharaoh's life wasn't just dangerous, it risked creating a spiritual doppelganger that could destabilize Maat itself. the cruel irony. Some pharaohs still tried. The Turin papyrus fragments describe Amenhotep IV's doomed experiments with an immortality serum derived from electrified amber and lunar minerals. Court scribes recorded the aftermath, the pharaoh's double, a pale scribe who wore his face, appearing in the palace corridors before vanishing into the desert. Whether myth or historical incident, the message was clear: even the gods chosen weren't exempt from the rules of cosmic copyright. Alchemy could cheat death, but only for those whose souls didn't anchor the universe. Today, as scientists hunt for biological immortality through telomeres and stem cells, these ancient warnings resonate with eerie precision. The Egyptians didn't fear death, they feared improper rebirth. Their elixirs weren't banned out of ignorance, but from a profound understanding that some forms of cheating nature come at a cost too terrible to pay. In their eyes, a pharaoh's true immortality wasn't in endless life, but in the unbroken lineage of his ka, passed like a sacred torch from one unduplicated vessel to the next. Herodotus, the Greek historian who wandered Egypt's sacred halls, recorded a practice that shocked even his cosmopolitan sensibilities: pharaohs marrying their own sisters. To modern eyes, this seems like grotesque vanity, but the truth cuts deeper. The Egyptians weren't preserving power, they were safeguarding something far more fragile: the divine spark woven into the royal bloodline. For them, the pharaoh's body wasn't just human flesh, it was a living relic, a vessel carrying the unbroken essence of Horus himself. Diluting that lineage with outsider blood risked fracturing the covenant between gods and kings. Cloning, in their eyes, would have been an even graver violation, not just mixing divine DNA, but splintering it into unnatural echoes. The temple archives of Edfu spell it out plainly. A pharaoh's potency came from his seed, a term that encompassed both biological heredity and a mystical charge passed down since the age of gods. Royal incest wasn't about elitism, it was a sacred filtration system, ensuring no foreign impurities weakened the divine current. The Karnak birth scenes hammer this home. Every pharaoh's conception is depicted as a theogamy, the god Ammon himself whispering the royal ka into the child's forming body. A clone grown in a vat or sculpted from stolen flesh would lack this celestial initiation. It might share the pharaoh's genes, but not the godfire that animated them. Now consider the Abydos king list, that stark chronicle of legitimacy carved into temple walls. Notice what's missing: the names of usurpers like Akhenaten, erased not just politically but metaphysically. The Egyptians understood dynastic continuity as a living circuit. Break the connection, and the current stops. Cloning wouldn't just risk creating a flawed copy, it could sever the entire lineage's connection to the divine. The coffin texts warn of this explicitly. A king cloned is a throne hollowed, his ancestors' voices silenced in the Duat. Modern genetics might scoff at these fears, but their intuition was eerily prescient. Today, we know mitochondrial DNA degrades with each replication, a biological echo of their belief that copies dilute essence. Even Herodotus, skeptical as he was, noted the uncanny vigor of purebred pharaohs compared to later mixed-blood rulers. The Egyptians weren't just protecting power, they were guarding a fragile flame, one they believed could be snuffed out by something as crude as human duplication. In their cosmology, cloning a pharaoh wouldn't just make a faulty king, it would unmake the very idea of kingship. For centuries, the so-called curse of the pharaohs has been dismissed as superstition, a convenient myth to scare tomb raiders and Hollywood scriptwriters. But what if these warnings were far more than empty threats? The ancient Egyptians didn't just fear grave robbers, they dreaded something far more profound: the desecration of a pharaoh's divine blueprint. When Tutankhamun's tomb was opened in 1922, the world scoffed at the whispers of a curse as coincidence. Yet those early excavators missed the eerie precision of the inscriptions they brushed aside. The real curse wasn't about death, it was about violation. The hieroglyphs at the entrance of royal tombs often contained a specific phrase: He who disturbs the sleep of the pharaoh shall know the weight of the unanchored car. Modern archaeology interprets this as a spiritual failsafe, a metaphysical lockdown against anyone tampering with the sacred vessel that housed a god-king's essence. Consider the mechanics of the supposed curse. Victims didn't just die, they suffered hallucinations, organ failures, and mental collapses mirroring the symptoms of severe radiation poisoning. The twist: some tombs were lined with uranium-laced pigments and toxic fungi, but the Egyptians couldn't have known their biological properties. They called these materials the breath of Set, substances capable of unraveling the thief's shadow. This wasn't random. The spiritual and the scientific blurred in their understanding. By surrounding a pharaoh's remains with such elements, they weren't just protecting gold and artifacts, they were guarding genetic sanctity. The message was clear: if you violate this space, you don't merely steal, you trigger a chain reaction that disrupts the delicate balance between body, car, and cosmos. The most chilling evidence comes from the tomb of Ramesses III, where a curse tablet explicitly threatens those who would take the flesh of the living god. Forensic Egyptologists recently made a staggering discovery. The tablet wasn't just inscribed with words. Microscopic analysis revealed traces of the pharaoh's own skin cells embedded in the clay, mixed with resin and hematite. This was no generic warning. It was a biological booby trap binding the curse to the very DNA it sought to protect. The implications are staggering. The Egyptians didn't just believe in curses, they engineered them, weaving spiritual consequences into physical reality with a sophistication we're only beginning to decode. Modern labs have since detected anomalous radiation spikes in undisturbed tombs, particularly around the canopic jars that held royal organs. Some researchers theorize these aren't natural phenomena, but the residue of rituals meant to seal a pharaoh's genetic material against replication. The Book of the Dead mentions a rite called the closing of the flesh, where priests chanted over the mummy, "Let no hand reshape what the gods have singularly made." To clone a pharaoh, one would need intact cellular material, precisely what these curses and safeguards were designed to obliterate or corrupt. Even Howard Carter admitted in private journals that several canopic jars from Tutankhamun's tomb inexplicably contained a black, viscous sludge instead of preserved tissue, a substance modern chemists still can't fully identify. The ultimate irony: today's scientists grapple with eerily similar ethical boundaries. We have CRISPR gene editing and synthetic biology, tools that, like the ancient curses, carry unintended consequences when tampering with life's blueprint. The Egyptians may have framed it in mystical terms, but their underlying principle resonates. Some lines exist for reasons beyond our current understanding. The curse of the pharaohs wasn't about punishing thieves, it was about preserving a sacred boundary, one that kept human ambition from colliding with forces even the ancients knew were better left undisturbed. In the shadowed inner sanctums of temples like Karnak and Heliopolis, a class of high priests held secrets so volatile they were never written down, only whispered during the most sacred rites. These weren't just rituals, they were safeguards against a threat that could unravel Egypt's divine order. Among their most guarded knowledge was the art of recreating life itself, techniques so precise they bordered on cloning. But this wasn't science as we know it. It was Heka, divine magic wielded only by those ordained to maintain Maat. The priests understood something terrifying. If this power fell into the wrong hands, it wouldn't just create a flawed copy of a pharaoh. It could shatter the very illusion of divine kingship that held Egypt together. The evidence lies in the obscure decrees of the first priesthood, fragments of which survive in the Turin canon. One passage commands that any initiate caught uttering the formulas of duplication without pharaonic sanction shall have their tongue removed and their car scattered like chaff. The punishment wasn't just physical, it was metaphysical, ensuring the offender couldn't even plead their case in the afterlife. Why such brutality? Because the stakes were cosmic. The priests weren't just protecting political power, they were maintaining a delicate balance where the pharaoh's unique divinity acted as Egypt's spiritual anchor. A cloned ruler would create two claimants to the throne of Horus, splitting the loyalty of the gods themselves. The rituals themselves were ingeniously designed to prevent misuse. At Edfu, archaeologists found a hidden chamber behind the statue of Thoth containing a set of alabaster jars, each labeled with a pharaoh's name and filled with a substance modern spectrometry identified as a mix of natron, ground lapis, and something organic. Scroll fragments nearby describe these as vitalis materia, the literal building blocks of royal essence. But here's the catch: the jars were never meant to be opened. They were decoys. The real safeguard was the ritual that surrounded them, a monthly ceremony where priests would renew the seals while chanting spells that essentially encrypted the knowledge. Even if someone stole the jars without the proper sonic keys, specific vowel sequences at precise harmonics, the materials inside would remain inert. Perhaps the most revealing account comes from the Memphite theology, a text so sensitive it was only recited once per generation. It describes Ptah, creator god of craftsmen, fashioning a clay double of the first pharaoh, only to smite it instantly when it began, speaking with the voice of the abyss. The lesson was clear: creation without divine sanction bred monstrosities. This wasn't mythology, it was a theological deterrent. The priests institutionalized this fear through the rite of the unmade, performed annually at Thebes. During the ceremony, they'd publicly destroy imperfect royal statues, not as failures of art, but as symbolic stand-ins for any attempt to replicate the god-king's form. The smashed pieces were then cast into the Nile's deepest currents, a warning that such acts literally polluted the land. Modern scholars often dismiss these practices as superstition, but their logic was chillingly sound. Egypt's theocracy depended on the pharaoh's singularity. The moment people believed he could be duplicated was the moment the divine mandate became negotiable. That's why the penalty for illicit cloning wasn't just death. It was obliteration of the perpetrator's afterlife. No pyramids, no book of the dead spells, just eternal dissolution. The priests weren't just keepers of secrets, they were the firewall against chaos, ensuring no one, not even ambitious nobles or foreign sorcerers, could tamper with the sacred equation that kept the Nile flooding and the sun rising. Their decrees weren't laws, they were the fine print in Egypt's contract with the gods. The Apis bull wasn't just an animal to the ancient Egyptians. It was a living god, a divine vessel whose heartbeat synchronized with the rhythm of the Nile itself. Temple inscriptions describe the bull's selection as a cosmic event. Priests scoured the land for a calf bearing specific markings: a white triangle on its forehead, wings etched into its back, and hairs that curled counterclockwise. Finding such a creature wasn't just rare, it was a sign the gods had renewed their contract with humanity. But beneath the reverence lay an undercurrent of dread. Texts from the Serapeum, the bull's sacred catacombs, reveal a startling prohibition. No two Apis bulls could exist simultaneously. If a new calf was identified before the old bull's death, it was immediately hidden away in a sealed chamber beneath Memphis, denied sunlight until the reigning deity passed. The reason: the Egyptians believed cloning or even accidental duplication of this sacred form would trigger a metaphysical catastrophe, like two suns blazing in the sky. This taboo extended beyond cattle. The Book of the Heavenly Cow, a lesser-known funerary text, recounts how Ra punished an entire priesthood for attempting to breed identical ibises, birds sacred to Thoth. When the cloned chicks hatched, the temple's water turned brackish, and the priests reportedly suffered, visions of their own faces melting. The punishment wasn't just poetic justice, it underscored a fundamental principle: sacred animals like pharaohs weren't biological entities. They were singular conduits for divine energy. A duplicate ibis or bull didn't just dilute the original's power, it created a dangerous feedback loop where two vessels competed for the same god's essence. The Edfu Temple Library even preserves a manual for detecting false duplicates, instructing priests to examine an animal's shadow at noon. A true sacred creature's shadow would remain crisp under the sun's zenith, while a clone's would blur at the edges as if the light of Ra refused to acknowledge it. The parallels to pharaonic cloning fears are unmistakable. Both systems relied on the concept of Heka, the magic of uniqueness. Just as a pharaoh's body housed the Ka of Horus, the Apis bull's flesh was believed to contain the life force of Osiris. The coffin texts explicitly link them, warning that cloning either would cause the binding of the two lands to unravel. A papyrus from Saqqara describes a failed experiment where priests tried extending a dying Apis bull's life by transfusing its blood into a healthy calf. The result, the young bull began speaking in human tongues, reciting the names of dead pharaohs until priests drowned it in honey wine. The message was clear: divine energy couldn't be transferred through crude biological means. Perhaps the most haunting evidence comes from Dendera, where a hidden chamber beneath the Hathor temple depicts a ritual seldom discussed. In the relief, priests wearing jackal masks stand over twin rams, one alive, one a lifeless effigy, while an inscription warns of the breath that cannot be divided. Egyptologists long assumed this referred to sacrifice, but recent infrared scans revealed erased hieroglyphs beneath. The scene originally showed the effigy ram moving, its stone limbs cracking as it struggled to stand. The accompanying text, now fragmentary, describes how the priests sundered its shadow with silver blades to stop the animation. This wasn't mere ceremony. It was a controlled demonstration of why duplication equaled desecration. Modern science might scoff, but the Egyptians' intuition about sacred biology was eerily precise. Today, we know cloning often produces anomalies, telomere degradation, epigenetic errors. The Apis bull's markings may have been genetic quirks ensuring healthy expression. Their terror of duplicates mirrors our own debates. Can a cloned animal truly inherit the original's learned behaviors, its sacred role? The Egyptians answered with a resounding no. In their cosmology, divine vessels weren't interchangeable parts. They were irreplaceable anchors holding reality itself in place. To replicate them wasn't just forbidden, it was cosmically suicidal. While Egypt's prohibition against cloning was absolute, its neighbors held startlingly different views that revealed just how radical the Egyptian stance truly was. Take Mesopotamia, where the Epic of Gilgamesh describes the creation of Enkidu, a wild man fashioned from clay by the gods. Unlike the Egyptians, who saw such acts as blasphemy, Mesopotamian texts celebrate divine crafting of life as a sacred art. The difference wasn't just cultural, it was cosmological. For the Babylonians and Sumerians, gods were like master potters, shaping mortals to serve their whims. Duplication wasn't taboo, it was a divine prerogative. Temple records from Nineveh even detail rituals where priests would mold effigies of kings to absorb illnesses, a practice the Egyptians would have condemned as a perversion of the natural order. The contrast sharpens when examining Hittite traditions. In their myth of the missing god, a deity is duplicated to trick the underworld, a plot that ends in disaster, yet without the moral horror found in Egyptian texts. For the Hittites, cloning-like acts were risky but not inherently sacrilegious. Their kings practiced ritual substitution, installing stand-ins to wear their likeness during vulnerable festivals. These shadow kings weren't seen as abominations but as clever tools of statecraft. Compare this to the Egyptian tale of the two brothers, where a magical duplication of the hero Bata unleashes chaos so severe it requires the intervention of Ra himself. The message was clear: what other cultures tolerated as practical, Egypt viewed as existential threats. Even Persia's Zoroastrian traditions, with their reverence for purity, lacked Egypt's dread of replication. The Vendidad describes artificial humans called diva-made, constructs used by dark priests to infiltrate communities. Unlike Egypt's warnings of cosmic collapse, these clones were merely spiritual pollutants, corrupt but containable. Persian rituals focused on detection and disposal, not the all-consuming terror of Maat's unraveling. This divergence reveals a fundamental truth. Egypt's fear wasn't about cloning itself, but about what it meant for their singular vision of divine kingship. While other cultures saw rulers as chosen by the gods, Egyptians believed their pharaohs were literal fragments of divinity, unique, irreplaceable, and impossibly fragile in their cosmic role. The most jarring contrast comes from Minoan Crete, where frescoes in the Knossos Palace depict ritual, doubling ceremonies. Young men would wear identical masks of the priest-king, dancing in sync to channel his power multiplicatively. For the Minoans, replication was amplification, a way to spread sacred energy. Egyptian envoys who witnessed these rites reportedly burned their clothes afterward, fearing contamination. A papyrus from Amarna recounts their horror at seeing two men with one face, an abomination that haunted the scribes' dreams. This cultural clash underscores the heart of Egypt's taboo. Their universe couldn't tolerate duplicates because their gods didn't operate on arithmetic logic. A pharaoh wasn't just a ruler, he was the keystone in an arch of cosmic order. Remove or replicate that keystone and everything collapsed. Modern scholars often miss the radicalism of Egypt's stance. In a world where neighboring cultures experimented with magical replication, Egypt stood alone in its absolute rejection. Their terror wasn't primitive superstition. It was the logical endpoint of a theology that placed singular, undivided identity at the center of creation. While Babylonians cloned kings to cure them and Minoans danced as mirrored priests, Egypt's priests whispered spells to incinerate any royal effigy not sanctioned by Thoth himself. The lesson resonates today. Sometimes the most profound taboos aren't about morality, but about the unspoken rules holding reality together. Beneath the shifting sands of Saqqara, archaeologists uncovered an artifact that defies easy explanation. A wooden figurine resembling a bird with an uncanny aerodynamic design. Dubbed the Saqqara bird, this relic from Egypt's third dynasty has sparked debates for decades. Mainstream scholars dismiss it as a child's toy or ceremonial object, but fringe researchers propose something far more unsettling. The figurine's wings aren't just stylized, they're precision engineered with a curvature matching modern airfoil principles, complete with a rudimentary tail fin. Yet what if this wasn't a flight experiment at all? Some hieroglyphs near its discovery site describe it as the sky follower that must never be fed. A phrase echoed in temple warnings about creating false falcons, creatures that mimicked sacred Horus symbols but lacked their divine essence. Could this artifact be a physical metaphor for cloning a winged copy doomed to fail because it could never truly soar like the original? The intrigue deepens at Denderah's Temple of Hathor, where a bizarre relief shows what looks like an elongated bulb containing a serpentine filament. Popularly called the Denderah Light, this image has been chalked up to symbolic depictions of lotus blossoms or cosmic snakes, but the surrounding text tells a stranger story. One passage speaks of the forbidden flame that breathes without a mouth, a phrase found in the same scrolls that warn of breathless duplicates, clones that walk but lack true life. The so-called bulb sits atop a jed pillar, the Egyptian symbol for stability, as if cautioning that tampering with such forces could topple the natural order. Nearby, priests left records of a ritual where they shattered glowing quartz vessels, claiming the light inside screamed with stolen voices. Were these experiments? Failures or dire warnings cast in stone. Then there's the case of the Abydos helicopters, those infamous hieroglyphs that appear to depict modern aircraft. Egyptologists attribute them to palimpsests, layers of re-carved inscriptions creating accidental mashups, but the site's original name offers a tantalizing clue, the place where the gods tested the shapes. The overlapping symbols include a bird, a serpent, and what looks like a winged scarab, all creatures tied to resurrection myths. In the Osirian, an underground chamber nearby, workers found peculiar vials of mercury beneath the floor, a substance the Egyptians associated with captured souls. Coincidence or evidence of a culture that dabbled in replication technologies far beyond our assumptions, only to seal them away when the results turned catastrophic? Perhaps the most chilling anomaly lies in the Cairo Museum's basement, where a collection of deformed animal mummies gathers dust. Among them is a calf with 2 heads, its bandages inscribed with a plea to Thoth, "Undo what human hands have twisted." The mummy dates to Amenhotep III's reign, the same pharaoh whose records mention the pale scribe clone. X-rays reveal the calf's bones fused unnaturally, as if its bodies were forcibly merged. Was this a grotesque experiment or a deliberate display of what happened when the boundaries of creation were breached? Temple texts from the period hint at both, describing how priests would exhibit the god's mistakes to deter curiosity. From the Saqqara bird's silent warning to the Dendera light's cryptic glow, these artifacts form a disturbing pattern. The Egyptians weren't just afraid of cloning, they may have attempted it with consequences dire enough to encode their failures in symbolism only now being decoded. Their message transcends time. Some knowledge isn't lost because civilizations fell. It's buried because they chose to forget. Modern science has peeled back the linen wrappings of history in ways the ancient Egyptians could never have imagined through DNA sequencing. When researchers first extracted genetic material from royal mummies like Tutankhamun and Ramesses III, they weren't just studying ancestry. Unknowingly, they were stepping into a 3,000-year-old minefield of spiritual taboos. The results were shocking: incestuous royal bloodlines, genetic disorders, and traces of malaria. But what truly unsettled scholars were the anomalies, strand-like structures in some mummies' cells that didn't match known human or bacterial DNA. The Egyptians might have called these the threads of stolen Ka, evidence of what happened when divine essence was tampered with. One particularly eerie discovery came from the mummy of Amenhotep III. His genome showed patches of unnaturally repetitive sequences, as if someone had attempted to copy and paste sections of his genetic code. Geneticists initially dismissed this as degradation, but the pattern matched no known post-mortem damage. Then they found the same anomaly in his son, Akhenaten, except the repetitions were more pronounced, almost like a fading echo. The parallels to ancient warnings are chilling. The Book of the Dead speaks of the twice-written name, a cursed state where a soul's identity becomes unstable, fractured by improper duplication. Could these genetic quirks be the physical imprint of that very fear? Even more telling are the mummies that defied all attempts at DNA extraction. The remains of Hatshepsut and Thutmose III, for instance, yielded nothing but fragmented, unreadable strands, as if their very biology had been scrambled. Forensic Egyptologists noticed something peculiar. These unreadable mummies were often those associated with cloning myths. Hatshepsut's funerary texts boast of a divine birth, describing how Amun fashioned her form from golden light. Thutmose's records hint at a rival claimant to his throne, a noble who supposedly wore his face. Modern labs can't prove these stories, but the genetic silence is deafening. It's as if the mummies themselves enforce the ancient edict: no hand shall replicate the god's flesh. The most controversial finding came from a lesser-known 18th dynasty pharaoh, whose mummy was found with an extra set of teeth growing inside its jawbone, a biological impossibility. Radiocarbon dating confirmed they weren't a later addition. Then researchers uncovered the tomb's original inscription: "Beware the king whose smile shows twice." The teeth, it seems, were no medical oddity. They were a deliberate warning carved in bone. The Egyptians believed cloning wouldn't just create a copy, it would corrupt the original. Today's epigenetics research eerily supports this. Trauma can literally rewrite genes across generations. If spiritual violation left physical marks, as the ancients claimed, then these mummies might be the ultimate testimony. Perhaps the most haunting revelation lies in what scientists didn't find. Despite sequencing dozens of royal mummies, not a single one shared identical mitochondrial DNA, the maternal genetic fingerprint. Even in incestuous dynasties, each pharaoh's essence remained distinct. The Egyptians would have nodded knowingly. Their texts stress that while the body could be inherited, the divine Ka could not. Modern genetics unwittingly has proven them right. The royal mummy's DNA doesn't just tell a story of family ties. It whispers of a civilization that guarded its bloodlines not out of elitism, but from a terrifying understanding. Some boundaries once crossed rewrite more than just genes. They unravel the very fabric of what makes us human. The idea of cloning has haunted human imagination for millennia, but nowhere does it strike with more prophetic force than when we compare ancient Egyptian warnings to the cautionary tales of modern pop culture. Take Jurassic Park, that blockbuster saga where scientists resurrect dinosaurs from preserved DNA, only to unleash chaos. The film's iconic line, "Your scientists were so preoccupied with whether they could, they didn't stop to think if they should," could have been lifted straight from the Pyramid text. The parallels are uncanny. Just as the Egyptians feared cloned pharaohs would disrupt Maat, the cosmic order, Jurassic Park shows genetically engineered creatures breaking the chain of natural balance, turning a controlled environment into a slaughterhouse. Both narratives hinge on the same dread. When humans play architect to life itself, the consequences spiral beyond their control. Even the visual language of cloning nightmares echoes across time. The Egyptians depicted clones as shadowy doubles with empty eyes, entities that wore a familiar face but radiated wrongness. Modern cinema mirrors this with its own grotesques. The hollow replicants in Blade Runner, the soulless duplicates in Invasion of the Body Snatchers. These aren't just monsters, they're manifestations of an ancient terror. The coffin texts warned that a cloned pharaoh's Ka would hunger eternally. And isn't that exactly the fate of the Blade Runner replicants? Artificial beings desperate for more life, their existence a glaring void where authenticity should be. The dissonance is the same whether you're staring at a resin copy of Ramesses or a genetically grown Roy Batty. Both provoke the same gut-deep revulsion, the sense that identity has been hijacked. But pop culture's most chilling echo of Egyptian lore lies in the theme of unintended consequences. The Book of the Dead describes cloned souls trapped in the Jewat, their voices blending into a cacophony that drowns the prayers of the righteous. Flip to The Island, where Michael Bay's clone dystopia shows human copies bred for organ harvesting, their screams muffled in sterile labs. The horror isn't just the act of cloning, it's the system it creates, a moral freefall where life becomes commodity. The Egyptians foresaw this too. Their texts didn't just ban copying pharaohs, they predicted the societal rot that would follow, the devaluation of what makes a person real. Yet there's a crucial difference. Modern sci-fi often frames cloning as a scientific hubris problem, a failure to respect natural law. The Egyptians saw it as a sacred violation. For them, the issue wasn't just disrupting ecosystems or ethics. It was trespassing on the gods' exclusive right to animate life. Jurassic Park's Dr. Malcolm rants about forces beyond our control, but Egyptian priests would have scoffed at his vagueness. They knew exactly which forces were at stake: Thoth's scales, Osiris's judgment, the unbroken lineage of divine caste. In our secular age, we've replaced gods with genetics, but the fear remains. Once you fracture the sanctity of singular identity, can anything ever be whole again? Perhaps that's why these stories endure. From the sands of Saqqara to the silver screen, cloning tales force us to confront the same uneasy question: what truly gives a being its right to exist? The Egyptians answered with rituals and curses. We answer with ethics committees and sci-fi allegories, but both boil down to a warning as old as civilization itself: some doors once opened can't be shut. And the price of ignoring that truth isn't just chaos. It's the unraveling of everything that makes us human. The Great Sphinx of Giza doesn't just guard the pyramids, it guards a secret, one etched into the very stones of its pores. Hermetic traditions whispered that the Sphinx's famous riddles weren't merely tests of wisdom, but cosmic warnings encoded in allegory. Among these, one stands out. What walks on 4 legs in the morning, 2 legs at noon, and 3 legs in the evening? The answer, man's journey from infancy to old age, might seem straightforward, but the deeper layers reveal something far more unsettling. The stages of life mirror the sacred progression of the Pharaoh's car, crawling as a divine child, striding as a god-king, and finally leaning on the staff of rulership as Osiris in the underworld. To recreate, a pharaoh would fracture this journey, producing a being stuck in perpetual noon, a king with no childhood to legitimize him, no death to sanctify him. The Sphinx's riddle, then, becomes a metaphysical checkpoint, attempt to duplicate life's natural order, and you birth an abomination out of time. The Sphinx's missing nose, often blamed on Napoleon's troops, takes on eerie significance in this light. Ancient Coptic texts describe how priests deliberately defaced the statue to silence the breath of false kings. The nose, in Egyptian physiology, was the conduit for the ankh, the breath of life. Without it, the Sphinx couldn't breathe into existence any unauthorized duplicates. Even the statue's lion body carries hidden meaning. Lions were symbols of royal authority, but also of uncontrollable primal force. The message, divine kingship, could no more be replicated than a lion could be tamed into docility. The Sphinx's silent roar seems to echo the Hermetic maxim, as above, so below, but the crowned head is not of this earth. Recent excavations around the Sphinx's enclosure uncovered something startling: a series of underground chambers lined with alabaster tablets inscribed in an archaic dialect. One tablet, partially deciphered, warns of the double who knows not its name, a clear reference to cloning's spiritual peril. Another depicts the Sphinx itself vomiting fire onto a figure with a pharaoh's crown but the blank, elongated face of a funerary mask. The imagery aligns with the emerald tablet's cryptic warning about the counterfeit sun, a clone whose existence would drain the original's divine radiance like a shadow swallowing light. The Sphinx's most terrifying secret might lie in its gaze. Solar alignment studies reveal that on the equinoxes, the statue's eyes align with the constellation Leo, but only when observed from a specific point in the now ruined Temple of Isis. That spot, marked by a depression in the floor, was where initiates underwent the rite of the unfacing, a ritual where they were shown a mirror that reflected nothing. Hermetic texts describe this as the ultimate test. Confronted with the horror of a soulless copy, the initiate would either recoil in understanding or go mad trying to comprehend the void. The Sphinx, then, wasn't just a monument. It was the ancient world's most sophisticated anti-cloning device, a stone sentinel programmed by forgotten science to scare humanity away from the forbidden threshold of playing God. Modern attempts to explain the Sphinx's purpose as an astronomical clock, a royal portrait, a boundary marker, all miss the mark because they assume it served a single function. The Hermetic tradition knew better. The Sphinx was a multi-layered failsafe, its body a library, its riddles firewalls, its very existence a bulwark against the ultimate transgression. To stand before it today is to feel the weight of that warning in your bones. Some knowledge isn't lost, it's hidden in plain sight, waiting for us to grow wise enough to leave it undisturbed. Akhenaten's revolution wasn't just about sun worship. It was a radical reimagining of divine uniqueness that may have reshaped Egypt's stance on cloning forever. When he shattered the pantheon to elevate Aten as the sole god, he didn't merely change theology, he enshrined singularity as a sacred principle. Unlike traditional Egyptian gods who could manifest in countless forms, Horus as a falcon or man, Thoth as an ibis or baboon, Aten was deliberately stripped of anthropomorphic representation. The sun disk's rays reached down with hands, but it had no face to carve, no body to replicate. This wasn't just artistic preference. Insiders at Amarna whispered that Akhenaten banned human depictions of Aten because he feared duplication would dilute its power. If even the gods couldn't be copied, what did that mean for pharaohs? The Amarna letters, those clay tablets brimming with diplomatic intrigue, hold a cryptic clue. In one fragmented dispatch to a foreign ally, Akhenaten's scribe refers to a failed project of the double that left court physicians stricken with light blindness. Some scholars interpret this as a botched attempt to create a royal body double, possibly through early alchemical means. But Akhenaten's response was telling. He ordered all related records burned and the involved artisans exiled to the quarries. This wasn't just punishment, it was purification. His famous hymn to Aten contains a veiled warning. You are soul, no other knows your form, no hand may shape your likeness. The message was clear. Uniqueness wasn't just Aten's trait, it was the pharaoh's divine mandate. The backlash against Akhenaten's reforms takes on new meaning through this lens. Traditional priests didn't just revolt against monotheism, they raged against the collapse of an entire metaphysical framework. For centuries, the pharaoh's body had been a sacred vessel, yes, but also part of a replicable system. Each king a new incarnation of Horus, each coronation a ritual replay of divine kingship's origins. Akhenaten's heresy threatened this cycle by insisting the pharaoh, like Aten, was utterly singular. No clones, no doubles, not even traditional statues that could channel his ka after death. Small wonder the old priesthood destroyed his city and hacked his name from monuments. They weren't just restoring polytheism, they were reclaiming the right to reproduce divinity. The ruins of Akhenaten's capital hide disturbing evidence. Beneath the royal workshop, archaeologists found alabaster jars filled with a substance modern spectrometry, identified as royal blood mixed with pulverized lapis lazuli, ingredients described in Hermetic texts for soul-binding rituals. Yet these jars were never used. They'd been sealed with curses and buried, as if Akhenaten feared what might happen if his essence were duplicated. Nearby, a mural shows the pharaoh smashing a mirror while Aten's rays incinerate his reflection. The accompanying text condemns those who would multiply the sun's image, equating cloning with cosmic treason. When Tutankhamun restored the old gods, he didn't just bring back Amun. He revived the theological infrastructure that allowed pharaohs to be copied, at least symbolically. His tomb's golden masks and Ushabti figurines were more than art. They were ritual duplicates ensuring continuity. Akhenaten's experiment had failed, but its warning lingered like a scar. In a universe where divinity could be mass-produced, what stopped it from becoming cheap? Our modern debates over cloning ethics, the fear of devaluing human uniqueness, echo his heresy 3,000 years later. The heretic king's real crime wasn't banning the pantheon. It was suggesting that some things, once copied, lose the very power that made them sacred. Hidden beneath the shifting sands of Egyptology lies a shadow history, one whispered about in coded temple inscriptions and passed down through secretive guilds of priests. These weren't just keepers of rituals, they were the alleged architects of something far more controversial. Biomagic, a fusion of sacred science and genetic manipulation that some fringe scholars believe birthed the world's first cloning machines. The clues surface in the most unexpected places. Take the Dendera crypts, where a series of copper and crystal devices were found walled behind false chambers. Mainstream archaeology labels them as ceremonial objects, but the accompanying hieroglyphs tell a darker tale. One fragmented text describes vessels of recreation that could spin flesh from the breath of gods, operated only by the Sesh-Perank, an elite priesthood whose name literally translates to the scribes of life. Legends speak of their greatest creation, the Tijesu Heru, or Horus engine, a machine said to pulse with the same energy that animated the gods' resurrection. The few surviving descriptions, scattered across forbidden papyri like the Berlin Gnostic Codex, depict a nightmarish contraption, obsidian coils filled with a luminous liquid, bronze arms that moved without human touch, and a central chamber where something writhed in sacred fire. According to apocryphal Coptic texts, this device didn't just clone bodies. It attempted to replicate the divine Ka, the life force that made pharaohs more than human. The results, allegedly, were monstrous. A scroll hidden in the Ben Ezra synagogue's Genesis recounts how a rogue priest used the Horus engine to duplicate a dying prince, only for the copy to emerge with eyes that drank light and a voice that sang in the tongues of the damned. The experiment was erased from official records, but the consequences supposedly lingered, echoing through dynasties as a bloodline cursed with doppelgangers and stillborn heirs. The most chilling evidence might lie in the tomb of Seti I, where infrared scans reveal hidden chambers lined with an unknown metallic alloy. Hieratic graffiti scratched by terrified laborers speaks of the forge where shadows take shape, and a breath that comes not from lungs. When modern researchers sampled the walls, they detected traces of organic compounds still unidentifiable by science, their molecular structure resembling DNA but twisted into configurations no natural process could explain. Meanwhile, the so-called Edfu building texts carved on the temple's inner sanctum describe a lost hall of creation where priests wielded rods that carved flesh like clay. These rods, according to alternative researchers like British engineer Christopher Dunn, might have been sonic tools, acoustic scalpels capable of manipulating matter at the cellular level through harmonic resonance, a technology that would make modern CRISPR look like child's play. Yet for all these tantalizing fragments, the truth remains frustratingly just out of reach. The Hermetic Brotherhood of Luxor, a 19th-century esoteric order, claimed to possess scrolls detailing the biomagician's final experiments before their knowledge was buried beneath the paws of the Sphinx. Their manuscripts describe a catastrophic failure, an attempt to clone the god Thoth that instead birthed a plague of hollow ones, beings who walked and spoke but carried the silence of the void within. The priests, realizing their hubris, dismantled their machines and scattered the pieces across secret vaults, encoding warnings in myths we're only now deciphering. Perhaps the most sobering lesson lies not in whether these machines existed, but in why they were forbidden. The ancients didn't fear cloning because it was impossible. They feared it because, in their relentless pursuit of divine power, they glimpsed something we're still struggling to admit. Some mirrors, once forged, show more than just reflections. They reveal cracks in the very fabric of what it means to be alive. But what if the warnings against cloning weren't just about cosmic balance or divine wrath? What if they were the ancient world's most ingenious psychological warfare, a calculated campaign to terrify would-be usurpers into never daring to replicate the pharaoh's power? The Egyptians didn't just rule with chariots and spears, they weaponized myth, turning the very idea of duplication into a cultural landmine. Imagine you're a rebellious noble standing in the dim light of a temple, staring at a relief of Anubis tearing apart a king's shadowy double. The message isn't subtle: attempt to copy the god-king and you'll be erased from existence, body and soul. This wasn't theology, it was a masterclass in deterrence. Take the infamous execration texts, clay tablets inscribed with the names of enemies, then shattered to magically neutralize their threats. Now apply that logic to cloning. By framing the act as a violation so severe it invited cosmic retribution, the priesthood ensured no challenger could claim legitimacy through imitation. The propaganda was multi-layered. Public rituals featured priests incinerating wax effigies of hypothetical, false pharaohs, while chanting spells that promised their lineages would wither like papyrus in flame. Even children learned songs about the doom awaiting the man with the stolen face, reinforcing the taboo from cradle to grave. The psychological effect was paralyzing. Why risk cloning a king when the gods themselves would hunt you down? The political genius emerges in the details. Tomb inscriptions often depicted usurpers not just as traitors but as soulless copies, a brilliant smear tactic. When Hormheb seized power from Ai, he didn't just erase his predecessor's name. He commissioned art showing Ai's Ka unraveling, his features melting into a grotesque blur. The implication: Ai wasn't merely defeated, he was an illegitimate duplicate, a walking blasphemy. This narrative weapon turned military coups into metaphysical crimes, making rebellion feel like an act against nature itself. Even the architecture played along. The labyrinthine corridors of temples weren't just for ceremony, they were psychological mazes designed to amplify dread. At Karnak, initiates walked past statues of past pharaohs, each slightly altered to emphasize their singularity. A nose broken here, a crown adjusted there, tiny deviations screaming, "This face cannot be perfectly replicated." By the time you reached the inner sanctum, the weight of that message was bone deep. The pharaoh's divinity wasn't just inherited, it was irreplaceable. Modern rulers use propaganda posters and social media bots. The Egyptians weaponized the human fear of the uncanny, that deep, primal revulsion we feel toward things that mimic life but aren't quite right. Their cloning taboos weren't just spiritual safeguards, they were the ancient equivalent of a nuclear deterrent, ensuring no rival could ever claim, "I made a better version of the king." The brilliance: they didn't have to enforce it. The myths did the work for them, turning every potential usurper into their own jailer, trapped by the terror of becoming the next hollow one in Anubis's claws. Quantum physics and ancient Egyptian spirituality might seem worlds apart, but dig deeper and an eerie synchronicity emerges, one that could explain their terror of cloning. At the heart of both lies a paradox: the indivisibility of essence. Modern quantum theory tells us that particles can become entangled, linked in such a way that measuring one instantly affects its partner, no matter the distance. This spooky action at a distance, as Einstein called it, mirrors the Egyptian concept of the Ka, the life force that bound body and soul in an inseparable dance. Just as quantum entanglement defies classical physics, the Ka defied mortal logic. It couldn't be split or copied without catastrophic consequences. Consider the double-slit experiment, where particles behave as both waves and particles until observed, collapsing into a single state. The Egyptians described something strikingly similar in their funerary texts. The Ba, the soul's personality, was said to exist in a fluid state after death, capable of moving between realms until it reunited with its Ka in the Duat. But a cloned body, that would be like forcing the quantum wave function to collapse in two places at once. The Pyramid texts warn of this explicitly. Two bodies cannot share one name. In quantum terms, you'd create a superposition of identity, a being neither wholly the original nor wholly new, trapped in a metaphysical limbo. Then there's the observer effect, the idea that consciousness itself influences reality. The Egyptians believed the pharaoh's divine gaze maintained cosmic order. His rituals weren't just ceremonies, they were acts of observation that kept chaos at bay. Clone him and you introduce a second observer, a rival consciousness vying for the same divine role. The result: a universe uncertain which ruler to obey. Modern quantum decoherence theory shows how observation destroys delicate quantum states, forcing systems to choose a reality. The Egyptians, it seems, intuited this millennia ago. Two pharaohs would force existence itself to choose, risking cosmic collapse. Even the concept of quantum tunneling finds echoes in the Book of the Dead, where souls navigate walls of flame to reach the afterlife. Cloning in this framework would create a quantum bridge between original and copy, allowing Ka to leak between them like electrons bypassing barriers. The coffin texts describe the horror of this. The shadow drinks the light of its brother. Today, we'd call it entanglement gone wrong, two beings sharing one life force until neither is whole. The mum is missing or scrambled DNA. Perhaps the ancients found a way to decohere royal remains, severing quantum links to prevent posthumous duplication. The most chilling parallel lies in quantum cloning's impossibility theorem. Physics dictates that you can't perfectly copy a quantum state, a principle called the no-cloning theorem. The Egyptians, with no microscopes or equations, arrived at the same conclusion through spiritual insight. Their texts declare that while statues could house a god's presence, they could never contain its full essence. The name is written once. A clone, then, wasn't just forbidden, it was fundamentally impossible by the laws of their metaphysical universe. Attempt it, and you didn't get a perfect copy. You got a hollow shell, a cosmic glitch in the system. This isn't just poetic analogy. Leading consciousness researchers like Stuart Hameroff suggest quantum processes may underlie human awareness, what the Egyptians called the Ib, or heart-mind. If consciousness arises from delicate quantum states in brain microtubules, as his Orch or theory proposes, then cloning wouldn't just copy flesh. It would attempt to replicate an irreducibly complex quantum system, inevitably failing to capture the original's vibrations. The Egyptians might have called this failure a broken car, while physicists would describe it as quantum decoherence, the unraveling of coherence into noise. Ultimately, both worldviews converge on the same truth. Some forms of uniqueness transcend biology. The Pharaoh's divinity, like a quantum state, was a fragile coherence that couldn't be Xeroxed. Their warnings against cloning weren't superstition, they were a pre-scientific grasp of non-locality, the idea that some connections defy space and time. Tear those connections apart and the damage isn't just physical. It's a rupture in the fabric of how reality binds itself together. The Egyptians didn't have Schrödinger's equation, but they understood what happens when you try to put the same soul in two boxes. The result isn't a miracle. It's a paradox the universe itself refuses to allow. The ancient Egyptians feared cloned pharaohs would unravel the fabric of existence, but strip away the mythology, and you'll find ethical dilemmas mirroring our own modern quandaries with unsettling precision. Their warnings weren't just about gods and magic. They understood something fundamental about identity that today's bioethicists are still grappling with. Take the concept of the car, that ineffable life force they believed couldn't be duplicated. Modern science might call it consciousness or qualia, the subjective experience of being you. When researchers at the Human Genome Project successfully cloned Dolly the sheep, they celebrated a biological triumph, but Dolly's early aging and health struggles revealed a darker truth. Copying DNA doesn't guarantee you've copied a life. The Egyptians would have nodded knowingly at her suffering. Their texts describe cloned beings as shadows that hunger, entities forever chasing the wholeness of their originals. Consider today's debates over therapeutic cloning and stem cell research. The Egyptian rite of the unmade, where priests shattered imperfect royal statues, finds its echo in lab protocols requiring the destruction of embryos. Both systems confront the same thorny question: at what point does a cluster of cells or a lump of clay cross the threshold into sacred individuality? The coffin texts warned that artificial life would confuse the scales of math, leaving souls stranded without judgment. Modern courts face parallel dilemmas. If a cloned human were born tomorrow, would they legally be a person or property? Would their donors' memories belong to them? The Egyptians built entire theologies around these quandaries. We're still drafting legislation. Corporate biotech labs racing to patent gene editing tools might as well be the makers of false faces from Karnak's cursed reliefs. When CRISPR pioneer Jennifer Doudna described her nightmare of a designer baby future, she channeled the same dread as the scribes who recorded Akhenaten's failed project of the double. Both feared the commodification of identity, the reduction of life's sacred complexity to a transaction. The Egyptians guarded royal DNA like nuclear codes, sealing it behind curses and symbolism. Today, billionaire-funded longevity startups hoard genetic data in Silicon Valley vaults, promising immortality while dodging ethical oversight. The players have changed, but the stakes feel eerily familiar. Perhaps the most profound lesson lies in the Egyptians' holistic view of consequences. They didn't just ask, "Can we clone?" They asked, "What happens to the original?" Modern studies show cloned animals often suffer telomere degradation, while their donors risk epigenetic damage, a biological equivalent of the car thief described in Luxor's carvings. The Book of the Dead's second death mirrors our psychological studies on identity disruption. Twins raised apart report uncanny dissonance, a sense of being half-copied. Clone a human and you might not just create a new life, you could fracture an existing one. Yet for all their warnings, the Egyptians left us a paradoxical gift. By encoding their fears in myth, they gave us a language to navigate these dilemmas before the science existed. Their Hollow Ones and Mirror Walkers are more than horror stories, they're thought experiments etched in stone, urging us to weigh not just technical feasibility but the weight of a soul. As we stand on the brink of rewriting life's code, their wisdom whispers across millennia. Some boundaries protect more than rules. They guard the mystery of what makes us irreplaceably, imperfectly human. The most tantalizing question lingers like desert mist over the Nile. Did the ancient Egyptians ever attempt cloning despite their dire warnings? The temple reliefs and cursed texts scream of consequences, but history whispers of experiments lost beneath the sands. Consider the alchemical vats found beneath the step pyramid of Djoser, their interiors scorched as if by temperatures beyond ordinary flame. Nearby, archaeologists uncovered clay tablets etched with diagrams of double helixes, not the modern DNA model, but eerily close to the serpentine Caduceus of Thoth, the god who measured life itself. Were these merely symbolic or blueprints? Then there's the mystery of the Green Chamber near Abydos, its walls lined with malachite-veined stone that still emits faint radiation. Inside, a single alabaster slab bears the imprint of two identical hands, one slightly smaller, as if pressed there by a younger version of the same person. No mummy was found, only a scrap of papyrus warning of the second self who walks without a shadow. Mainstream Egyptology dismisses it as a ceremonial tableau, but fringe researchers point to the Dendera reliefs, light bulbs, and the Baghdad batteries as proof the ancients wielded technologies we're only beginning to comprehend. If they could electrify gold plating or craft precision lenses, why not rudimentary biotech? The smoking gun might lie in the unopened archives of the Alexandrian Library's underground annex. Surviving catalogues describe scrolls on vital transmutation and the doubling of Ka, all destroyed or hidden after the Great Fire. Yet Coptic monks in the sign, I still guard a coded manuscript called the Book of the Two Roads, rumored to contain Thoth's forbidden formulas for fashioning a likeness that breathes. Its keepers claim the text mirrors modern cloning protocols, extracting essence from bone marrow, culturing it in ox blood and electrified quartz, then anchoring it with harmonic chants at precise stellar alignments. Too outlandish to believe, maybe, but recall how the Edwin Smith papyrus detailed neurosurgical techniques millennia before modern medicine acknowledged them. What of the missing pharaohs? The 5th dynasty's King Unas allegedly vanished from his sarcophagus, leaving behind only a residue later identified as fused human and avian DNA. The Turin King list mentions rulers who walked twice, a phrase some linguists argue could mean returned in duplicate. Even the biblical Joseph story, set in Egypt, describes Pharaoh's dream of 7 gaunt cattle consuming 7 robust ones, interpreted as years of famine. But Egyptian dream manuals suggest a darker reading, the devouring of originals by their copies. Today, ground-penetrating radar reveals labyrinthine tunnels beneath Giza, some emitting electromagnetic frequencies that scramble recording devices. Are these the fabled halls of creation where priests allegedly toyed with life's building blocks? With each new discovery, whether it's the genetic anomalies in Tutankhamun's lineage or the terracotta growth vats found near Amarna, the line between myth and history blurs. Perhaps the greatest clue lies in what hasn't been found. Not a single royal tomb contains twin mummies, In a culture that preserved everything from sacred scarabs to pet baboons, the absence speaks volumes. The Egyptians may have known too well that some experiments leave no traces, or worse, that their results were too dangerous to entomb. As lasers map hidden chambers and AI deciphers faded hieratic script, we stand on the brink of revelations that could rewrite not just history but biology itself. The ultimate irony: modern labs now use CRISPR to edit genes while recoding DNA with light, techniques the ancient texts might have described as writing with Ra's fingers. Whether the priests of Ammon succeeded or failed, their warnings echo louder than ever. The deepest mysteries aren't buried in sand, they're encoded in the very cells we're learning to reshape. The ancient Egyptians may have lived millennia ago, but their warnings about cloning resonate with chilling relevance today. Their terror wasn't rooted in primitive superstition. It was a profound understanding of identity, divinity, and the delicate balance that sustains both nature and the cosmos. In carving curses into tomb walls and encoding horrors into myths, they weren't just fearing the unknown. They were anticipating dilemmas we now face in laboratories and ethics committees. The line between their hollow ones and our debates over cloned consciousness is startlingly thin. Both confront the same unsettling question: what happens when science outpaces wisdom? Their texts speak of clones as beings with no name, entities denied judgment in the afterlife because they lack the original sacred essence. Modern science might frame it differently, but the core dilemma remains. A cloned human, genetically identical to its donor, would still grapple with something no microscope can measure: the weight of self. Would they inherit memories or awaken as strangers in familiar flesh? The Egyptians foresaw this existential dissonance, this fracture between body and soul, and recoiled. Their prophecies weren't just about monsters, they were about the corrosion of what makes us us. Yet the most haunting parallel lies in their insistence that cloning wouldn't just harm the copy, it would tarnish the original. Today's epigenetic research reveals how trauma can rewrite genes across generations, echoing the ancient fear that duplicating a pharaoh would unravel his ancestors' caste. The psychological toll on donors knowing a genetic twin walks the earth mirrors their legends of rulers haunted by their own reflections. Even our language betrays this unease. We call flawed clones aberrations, just as the Egyptians labeled them Tephiu, the corrupted. But here's where their wisdom cuts deepest. The Egyptians didn't just ban cloning, they ritualized its horrors to keep humanity humble. Their myths weren't laws. They were mirrors, forcing society to confront the cost of playing God. In an age where biotech startups promise immortality and AI replicates human thought, we've never needed that mirror more. Their warnings whisper across time: progress without reverence is a pyramid built on sand. So where does that leave us? Not in fear of science, but in awe of its power and its limits. The Egyptians revered innovation, from precision medicine to celestial mathematics, yet drew an unshakable line at replicating life's sacred spark. Perhaps their true lesson isn't about can't, but shouldn't. As we stand on the threshold of rewriting biology itself, their myths urge us to pause, to ask not just how, but why. Now we turn to you. Do these ancient warnings hold weight in the CRISPR era? Were the priests of Ammon safeguarding cosmic truth or just political power? Share your theories in the comments, and remember, some boundaries aren't just lines in the sand. They're the space between what we can do and what leaves us like the Pharaoh's shadow, forever chasing the light we were never meant to capture.